Saturday against Rutgers, the direction of this season is on the line for Nebraska. We discuss next.
You are Locked On Nebraska, your daily Nebraska Cornhuskers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Good morning, and thank you for making Locked On Nebraska your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase.
All right, welcome to a Thursday show, just a couple days away from Nebraska and Rutgers. So we're going to talk about the enormity of that game here in just a second. I'm Connor Happer from 1620 The Zone in Omaha. Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. All right, it's a big game. It's a big two games to be completely honest, but let's go one at a time, especially considering there's some time in between the next of the two games. So it's a game against Rutgers, and I don't know that I've sensed, Mitch, that people aren't they're having a tough time getting up for it. But it doesn't exactly hit the same as a Michigan would or as a Wisconsin would, and that's, I think, natural. But it's just as big as those as of right now.
Well, it's kind of more big than those, because right now with where Nebraska's at as a program, and the Huskers are going to play Ohio State in 3 weeks, you kind of chalk that one up as a certain outcome, not a win. And this is a game that's not in any way like that. So I feel like it's just been kind of flying under the radar, like it's, some random game against Rutgers. And Nebraska's 7-0 all time against Rutgers. It's Rutgers. Like, we recognize that Rutgers is 4-0 and they've done this before. But it's just a game. No, it's not. Like, if Nebraska wins this game, it's 5-1. If it loses, it's 4-2 going into a bye week, and we know how that's going to play. And then you have likely undefeated Indiana in Ohio State in consecutive weeks after the bye. So 4-1 could quickly become 4-4. Not to be too doom and gloom, but that's the realistic outlook if Nebraska fails to win on Saturday.
Well, and here's the deal too, like, not to look too far ahead and not to go scare tactics or whatever, but I mean, if you're 4-4, which is totally, it's a possibility. That Nebraska could be 4-4 at the end of the Ohio State game, and they're heading into November with that record going into 4 more games. Like, the outlook on the season has changed. You're talking about, can we find a way? Can we scratch and claw some way to get our way to a bowl game? That's the narrative. Like, that's the main focus right in front of you every single day, whether it's from the team or from the fan base. If you are 6-2 after those games, then that is a much different conversation with a loss to Ohio State and a loss to a halfway decent Illinois team. Like, it's a completely different conversation. Everything you wanted from before the season is still on the table. You're in contention.
We're talking about 9 wins.
Yeah, you're talking about 9. Like, you're talking about a good bowl game. And if things break right for you, there's still like chances for way, way bigger goals out there. So it just changes the outlook depending on not only this week, but how these next 2 or 3 weeks go. Baking in, and I think it's an important point you make, Mitch, like, you bake in the loss to Ohio State. I don't know that like, we'll talk about that when we get there, but you're going to bake it into the cake that they're going to lose the game. So these are 2 really important ones, because that one's going to be really tough.
Nebraska could beat Ohio State. Nebraska could beat Indiana. But in order to get in position to do those, you would certainly think it's going to best suit Nebraska to beat Rutgers. Like, I'm not feeling confident about Indiana, and I'm certainly not feeling confident about Ohio State if Nebraska doesn't go out and win on Saturday afternoon at home against a Rutgers team that is not as highly regarded as either one of those two right now. So, look, a year ago, going into November, Nebraska was 5-3.
Yep.
4-4 this year, and they're 4-1 right now. But 4-4 going into November this year, or even 5-3, the same record as a year ago, doesn't necessarily portray, it certainly doesn't portray the kind of improvement in the program and upward trajectory that we've been talking about and that Nebraska has been putting forward and showing signs
Right.
of all through the last 7, 8, 9 months of this year.
Like you said, because if they're that is a really great way to put it, because if they're 5-3 going into November, it'd be the same thing that they did last year. But I think almost everybody agrees that this team is better and more capable than last year's.
But you got to show it.
The record is still the same, right? You get the tests. The tests are the tests, and that's what you get. So it would I think it would be like a sobering type of deal to look around and say, yeah, I know we kind of blew that one, but you're in this mix with everybody else. And it really does show how thin your margins for error was. Nebraska had one of the worst offenses in the country last year, and now they're doing it with one of the best quarterbacks in the conference, if not in the country. And they may still end up having the same record at the end of October.
I mean, you need to win both of these next 2 games if you want to avoid having that same record. That's the reality of it. Now, November went off the tracks bad for Nebraska last year. It lost 4 one-score games. I don't think anybody expects that November of 2024 is going to be like that. But going into November of 2023, that was not what people expected. Nebraska had a lot of momentum going into November of 2023, probably certainly more momentum than it's going to have this year, unless it can pull off the upset of the last 20 years at Nebraska, which would be winning at the Horseshoe. So we've talked about before of how, like, to truly turn this thing at Nebraska, to get it going in a direction where it's not talk and the way that players look and the progress that we see on the Chasing 3 documentary, which we're going to discuss the latest episode of that in the later in the show. If it's real tangible progress that is measured in the way that you can truly only measure progress by wins and losses, it's going to take a victory of the sorts that Nebraska just hasn't been able to pull off in a long, long time. Like, you're going to have to go beat a top 10 team, and that's what stands in front of them at the end of this month. But, before that are these 2 monumental games. And the first one is Saturday at 3:00 at Memorial Stadium. So if there's anybody who's kind of like ho-hum about this, like, yeah, we'll see how it goes, it's just Rutgers. Like, no, I mean, this one matters so much. Like, right now, as we sit on the doorstep of it, like, and you have clear eyes, it matters more than Colorado did. But that was the one that I think that everybody pointed to in the first half of the season that was like the emotionally charged, like, barometer for this team.
Do you feel like there's like almost a boredom right now? I mean, I know the Illinois game was, sort of fiery in that way, and they came back and they got but like it's these games in a row, and we talked about this plenty before the season, what the first 7 were compared to what the last 5 were, and just how different they are, really, in terms of everything. But you're in this stretch now where you're not undefeated anymore. You're not ranked. It's Illinois, Purdue, Rutgers, Indiana, all in a row. And it's just kind of like, all right, can we get a helmet in here? I don't know. Is that the way you think people are viewing it? Because I don't feel the edge maybe that I felt in the first couple of weeks of the season.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's dangerous. I think it's dangerous for us, and that's just like totally gauged off of like who we interact with. I mean, you've got a radio show, and you hear from people, and I'm out here talking to people, and we're just living our lives here in the state of Nebraska around Omaha, and I do sense that, like, there's fewer questions about it that come up. Like, you're not hearing the conversation as much, like, at the gas station or whatever it might be. You're walking through Hy-Vee, and people aren't going, oh, big game this week. I mean, it's not that kind of a vibe right now here in the middle of the season. And I don't know if it would still feel that way if Nebraska hadn't had that loss against Illinois. Like, if Nebraska was 5-0 right now and Rutgers was coming in, I think it'd be different.
Yeah.
Like, it shouldn't be. Like, 4-1 is good for this team. If this was 1994 or 1995 and Nebraska was 4-1, I could understand, like, the sentiment that it's like, oh, it's kind of disappointing. They lost one of their first 5 games. This is a team that's had 7 consecutive losing seasons. Being 4-1 with 2 winnable games coming up over the next 3 weeks. Rutgers and Indiana, there's a bye in the middle. I'm not calling Ohio State a loss in that context. That's where you want, like, this is great. This is where you want to be. Like, this is what should be going on as you rebuild a program. These games are monumental for Matt Rhule's ability to turn this thing on the timeline that he wants to do it.
Yeah. I think there was a trust, a building trust in the first, month of the season, especially after the Colorado game. And that Illinois game just, it was a big hit to it. It really was. And so you're trying to earn that back week by week, but you can only play one game at a time. So it's an interesting dynamic, but it's a gigantic game this weekend, and we'll have plenty more on it throughout the rest of this show and tomorrow. Appreciate you guys listening, subscribing. Keep doing that on YouTube. Leave a comment and participate in the show. We'd love to hear from you guys. We'll be back on the Locked On Nebraska podcast after this. All right, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get the hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more right on the same page where you place your bets. So you're sitting there on a Sunday afternoon, and the 9 noon games or whatever are on, and you're like, man, I'm bouncing from back and forth right now. Look into it. See if there's anything that jumps out to you. See if there's anything that you like while you're watching the game. That is in the wagering variety. You'll get started. New customers with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Man, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That sounds like a sweet deal to me. So head to FanDuel.com. Once again, that's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Welcome back on this Thursday edition of the Locked On Nebraska podcast. I'm Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Connor Happer of 1620 The Zone is with me, as he is every day, enjoying his coffee at the start of this beautiful week 6 day. Fall is here. It's going to be 98 degrees at Memorial Stadium on Saturday night. That was a little bomb that showed up in my 5-day forecast on Wednesday. What the heck? We need some fall weather, and it is pretty much fall weather throughout the week. And then there's that 98 that's there on Saturday. So what you got? What you got? What's it say?
It's just like a lot of blue, and then one red, and then blue, kind of greens, cooler colors. It says 89, not 98. But
you have it set on Omaha or Lincoln?
Omaha. Is Lincoln more? It says 90 for Lincoln. There you go.
All right, let's come down. Rusty Lord from WOWT was sounding the alarms on Wednesday, saying it was going to be 98 and we were going to push, or maybe 96. 98 was the all-time October high for the city of Lincoln. Look, it's going to be hot. So if you're going to the stadium, drink lots of water, seek shade before the game. And for Nebraska, this is a new situation. Had it a little bit early this year where they are on the west side. And they get to in it, but it's farther deeper into the fall, as happens when the football season progresses. It gets farther into the fall, and the sun sets earlier in the day, and they'll have some shade. The press box will be providing shade for Nebraska on the west sidelines, and Rutgers, Greg Schiano and those guys from New Jersey are going to be baking in the sun. So maybe an advantage for Nebraska. I know last year when Michigan came in to Lincoln, Jim Harbaugh made the comment. Was that last year? Yeah, Michigan come in here last year. Yeah, that it was probably 20 degrees cooler on the Michigan side of the field than it was the Nebraska side of the field for a game like this. So Matt Rhule said, "All right, we're going to do something about this like immediately, right now." That could be in play. Could be a factor as Nebraska and Rutgers get going. 3 p.m. start. Okay, so on Wednesday night, Nebraska released the latest edition of its Chasing 3 documentary. Always fun to talk about these things. We get a real view behind the scenes of the program that's just not available anywhere else. So it started with a cool montage of some fans talking about the meaning of the 400th sellouts. This was an episode that covered the Illinois game. They did acknowledge that Nebraska lost a game in the state produced documentary. There was a Harry Callis voiceover. I recognized it. The old NFL Films guy. I believe he did the Phillies games. Do you know that voice, Connor?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So someone dug deep into the archives, and it wasn't. I mean, you expect Keith Jackson, but Harry Callis, like incredible to hear that
What a pull.
on this documentary.
Somebody else who's not one of the young social media documentarists probably pulled that. No way the young kids know about Harry Callis these days.
No, for sure not. I mean, listen to it and tell me if you think it's. I know it's Harry Callis. It has to be Harry Callis. Yeah. Like it's the voice it's one of a kind. So this episode showed the disappointment and the mistakes that led to Nebraska losing on Friday night, and it really focused on a lot of the injury situations that were going on the defensive side for Nebraska. You got footage of Jamari Butler leaving the game and walking down the hallway sadly to the locker room, and Ty Robinson just kind of devastated for Jamari that he wasn't able to be out there on that Friday night. You saw Tommy Hill get hurt and go into the medical tent, and Sierra Wright come out onto the field and make plays in that game. So he stepped up. And then there was a lot of focus after the Illinois game leading into Purdue week about Javin Wright. And he's somebody that we've not talked about this week, but Javin returned maybe a month and a half earlier than what Nebraska thought might happen when he had that new episode of blood clots in his right leg that showed up in August. Javin played, and Nebraska actually structured its practices. You heard from Matt Rhule in this episode. They structured the practices a little bit different during the week so that they could get Javin, who's in a green jersey, more reps in practice in order to get him ready for the Purdue game, where he was going to take part in the first contact, I believe, that he'd endured since August. So that was cool to see, and good timing for me. I wrote about Javin Wright today, Thursday, on The Athletic. Story is up right now. It's actually a story about both Wrights, unrelated, Sierra Wright and Javin Wright, and what they can add to the Nebraska defense as we go toward the second half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, they were shooting. Rhule said this week they were shooting for like the USC game, which is what, the second week in November.
Yeah, it's ways down the road.
Yeah, it's still a month plus away for Javin Wright at first. So man, and that's all of a sudden, linebacker and defensive back, specifically corner. I mean, there's some depth there now. You have some guys that have come back from injury. I mean, Bly Hill is still working his way back at that corner spot as well. Like, he's going to factor into the equation as we go on throughout the, like, there's some guys.
He's a 4-game guy. I wonder if Bly's a 4-game guy.
He might be. So you'd have to wait 2 more games still left. Well, no. Yeah, you'd have to wait 2 more games still. What's Nebraska 4-1 right now?
Yeah, so they would have to have played 8 games. So you need 3 more games if you're going to play him at 4. But has he played? Has he gotten in on special teams? I think he might have in one of the first games. I don't know. We'll have to.
I don't think so. Right?
Okay. No. All right. We'll check on that, and he might have played against Northern Iowa. I don't know, and we'll report on that next week. Maybe that could be a mailbag question. Somebody should send that in as a mailbag question about Bly Hill. Come on. Are you listening? Send in a mailbag question. We're going to do a mailbag show, or at least part of a show that's a mailbag, on Friday tomorrow, along with our picks for week 6.
Okay. Yeah. But anyway, the point still stands. They have some depth back there, and getting guys back. I mean, Javin Wright was a big part of like the leadership, part of this team, like Absolutely. In the preseason camp and stuff like that. So like, to get him back, you could tell that it's a bit of a lift for them. So I don't have, by the way, just quick half-assed research here. I don't have Bly Hill on any participation reports this year.
Okay, good job. Yeah, I just was pulling up my notes here with the Nebraska-Purdue game, and it's not listed. There's not a participation chart listed in the few pages that I just leafed through. So he may not have played, and yeah, if you can get him for those 4 November games, that would be fantastic.
Yep. So adding to that a little bit. By the way, maybe this is another idea as we're going off on other topics now, just of like we're producing the show in the air. Maybe we look at, after this week, guys who were in line for those 4 games. Because I'm looking at some of these, the guys who have played in every game so far, guys who have played in, less than all of them. It's interesting if there's a couple guys in there that they could sneak a red shirt on and get an extra year of eligibility by just playing 4.
Well, the 2 big ones that we know about are Malachi Coleman, and we've heard nothing about Malachi Coleman over the last few weeks since the beginning of the season when he didn't play against was it Northern Iowa or I believe Northern Iowa.
Yeah. He hasn't played at all the whole season.
So is he your November weapon off the bench? Like it's like, okay, Malachi, now you're being unleashed on UCLA, USC, Wisconsin, and Iowa. I don't know. That's an intriguing thought.
I don't know.
If he's ready to go, I mean, if Malachi's in a place where he's ready to go and he
Right.
can get himself ready, then that is a weapon unlike what a normal college football team is going to be able to just send out there. Nebraska did this with Marquise Buford a year ago, and he became a starter again on the defense because he was coming back from injury. But just saving a guy who is as talented as anyone on your roster and saying, all right, here you go. Here's your 4 games. You get to be a redshirt freshman a third-year sophomore in 2025. We'll see where that goes. And then the other one's Riley Van Poppel, who's played in a couple of games on the defensive line, but they may save him for 2 more. Maybe he plays against USC and Ohio State. Maybe he plays against Iowa and Wisconsin when it's rough and tumble, Big Ten, late November, that kind of thing. But I think there are probably some others that we're potentially overlooking here, including several true freshmen. Nebraska's playing a lot of true freshmen right now. Some of these players are going to play 4 games, and others, most of whom the names, are going to play 12.
Yeah. So that's something to watch for, and we'll have that segment maybe at some point as we're cooking up ideas right now. Let's take a quick break. We will come back and get into some more things from Matt Rhule, a little window into how they approach that Purdue game and how they're approaching this one coming out of it as well. We'll be back after this. All right, we are back. Here's our automatic, 30-second Royals chat. They're in the ALDS, and they're going to get a home playoff game for the first time since 2015, and I couldn't be happier. This is amazing.
Seriously looking at tickets, Connor, for Wednesday and potentially Thursday. Thursday's an if necessary game. Whoa, I mean, this is big time stuff. What happened yesterday at Camden Yards? Bobby Witt, consecutive days with the game-winning RBI. We're going to play the Yankees, man. It's the Yankees. Like, this is stuff from my childhood that I don't even remember. Like, I was too young to remember any of that.
It's the late 70s again.
Yeah, I would prefer that they repeat 1980 when the Royals swept the Yankees out of the ALCS. But yeah, it's the late 70s. That's when that thing was on fire, and the Yankees were the villains of Major League Baseball, and the Royals were like the anti-villain. So excited. Saturday night, you're going to be doing Big Red overreaction during the game.
I was going to ask you about this.
What are you going to do about this?
Have you heard about this is my plight. The listeners, I don't know if you could sympathize with me at all, but if you can't tell, I am a huge Royals fan, and if they're in the playoffs, like, I have to watch every second of every game, and I'd prefer to watch them in a very quiet, cold area where nobody can bother me, touch me, talk to me, anything like that. Ask me how I'm doing. That's how I prefer to watch my teams while I'm under stress. And so when I go to watch the Royals play in ALDS Game 1 in the Bronx on Saturday night at 5:30 p.m. local time,
no, it's 5:38.
I will be watching
17:38 military time.
Interesting. We will all be watching deep into the second half of the Nebraska-Rutgers game, and shortly after that game ends, I will have to do our Big Red Overreaction post-game show, and basically this will last throughout the duration of the baseball game. This is my personal hell. I'm not excited for this. This is not fun for me. People are just going to call into the show and tease me about it, depending on the Nebraska result. But this is very bad news for Connor Happer.
Can you not switch with someone and get out of this thing?
I can, but people want me to do it for the bit now, and I
Yeah,
do.
okay.
You know,
All right.
I guess I'm here for the clicks. I'm clickbait, man.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Well, you get to hear us talk about the Royals for at least another week. So that is fantastic for us.
Yep.
Go Bobby Witt. All right. We're going to go back to talking about Nebraska football here. I want to highlight a few more things, a couple more things from the Chasing 3 that premiered on Wednesday night on YouTube. Quote from Matt Rhule in this episode at halftime of the game against Purdue when it was 0-0. He tells the team, "Don't worry about me yelling at the officials. That's how I have fun." So I like that. Keeping it loose. We saw in this episode that the Nebraska coaches did not go into the locker room of that 0-0 game, all fire and brimstone, yelling at the Huskers about how they squandered opportunities on offense all throughout the first half. So Rhule's comments after the game in saying that was right where we wanted them were true to they were true to form. Like that's legitimately, it wasn't revisionist history. That's legitimately how he approached that in the moment. And I think that had a lot to do or something to do with how Nebraska responded in the second half.
There's nothing that coaches love more than having their players get tested like in an organic way. I mean, you could put them through all the tests that you want. You could put them through drills. That's why they put them through the stress that they put them through in the off season. But when it's actually happening in the game, it takes like it's specifically Matt Rhule's approach to usually just say, "All right, I'm out. You guys better figure this one out." You know what? He's one of those guys. So I think he likes the way that they responded, and there's only one way to learn that lesson. Like you just have to kind of go through it and you have to do it. I think that's what he was talking about.
So have you been watching College Game Day this year?
Yeah.
I feel like College Game Day, it has improved by leaps and bounds. Like it's a different show. I almost feel like I have to watch it or listen to it when I'm in the car this year because for one reason, Nick Saban.
Yep.
And we have not talked about this. So we're on the same page here. He has changed the show. He is so interesting and insightful. Like he has no ability to BS on this in this new role as a commentator.
Mm-hmm.
I saw somebody, was it Lane Kiffin or somebody in college football, probably wasn't Lane Kiffin, advocated that Saban become the commissioner of the Power Four. I'm all for it. I'm all for it. So he said in recently, and I find myself like going into my Notes app on my phone and writing things down that I hear Saban say during College Game Day, because I'm like, I'm going to talk about that on the Locked On Nebraska pod, or I'm going to write about this somewhere in an article. And one of the things that he said a couple weeks ago was the greatest thing that can happen as a coach, and I'm paraphrasing him, is to play poorly and still win.
Yep.
Because it gives you, like, it gets their attention. You don't have a loss on your record, but it's like a loss because it gives you the ability as a coach to dig your teeth in and actually do your job, and the players will listen. Well, Nebraska didn't get angry. Matt Rhule, Marcus Satterfield, Tony White, they didn't get angry at Nebraska after the first half Saturday at Purdue, but they had the Huskers' attention. The team came off the field. It was 0-0, and all of a sudden, everything that the coaches said was being absorbed, I think, in a different way than if it had been 14-0 or whatever. So Rhule's joking with them about the officials, and he was of course mad about the phantom holding call. Was it a holding call on Thomas Fidone? No, it was offensive pass interference on Thomas Fidone when he didn't touch the Purdue defender. He was mad about that and was letting the players know that that's okay. That's how I have fun. He had fun throwing his headset after halftime.
He has a really, I mean, I don't know if it's rare, but it's certainly different from what we've seen around here. He has a real ability to see things for the bigger, much bigger picture, right? And then do things that he knows will pay off down the line, right? Everything is a long game with him. It's like it's setting seeds for something. It's laying down the groundwork for stuff. Like he has no problem taking some punches right now for something that he thinks is going to help his team out or him out in in future weeks. And that's still what's happening, like it or not, with this team. That's what he said on Monday. He's like, hey, people might not like it, but we are an improving team. Or he said that Saturday, I think. We're growing, right? And there's some growing pains. And so I think this is all part of the plan for him. I think he loves where the group is at. And that doesn't mean that they're going to win every game the rest of the way. But I think he knows that they've laid some groundwork for what's going to come after this.
Doesn't mean that they're not going to be 4-4 going into November, but yeah, the stuff on the periphery, like he likes. He said also after the Illinois game, look, if we had made that field goal and gone out and gotten a stop and won that game, then we would have lost another game later this year like this because of the mindset that the team had. And he was telling them, now you got this out of the way. Now you know how this feels. And, whether that is real and proves to be true, we'll find out. But it is a kind of a genius way as a coach to approach that. Something else that was lost in that last game that Nebraska might love to take into this Rutgers game is the way that it was physical at the point of attack, specifically on the goal line. Rutgers is one of the better red zone defenses in the country. And if you go back and watch the 4th and 2 play or 4th and 1, where Dowdell dove into the end zone and scored to give Nebraska, was that 14-3 at that point? I think it gave Nebraska a 14-3 lead. So Rhule showed the Huskers in film review after the Purdue game a clip from practice the previous week of Liebentritt going head-to-head with 2 Nebraska defenders and losing the battle, the same play. And in the game, he won the battle. He took 2 guys out, and it was just an easy dive into the end zone.
It's gigantic hole,
for Dowdell. Yeah. So that's a little insight also that you don't generally see with the team until they produce a ESPN caliber documentary that goes back into practice and shows the team, like, this is why we practice the way that we practice. So then when we get to the game, like, you can execute.
And Rhule loves dudes like Barrett Liebentritt too, who, I mean, specifically the fullback, but also like the idea that he won't ever touch the ball. Like he came here on a whim. He knows he signed up for not ever touching the ball or whatever. He signed up to just run into dudes, and like, he'll never get any credit whatsoever. Like, obviously Rhule's going to point that guy out. He'll spotlight that guy like 7 days a week.
You don't think he'll touch the ball this year?
No, I do not.
We might have to have a prop on this. Yeah. Okay. Like the over-under will be like 0.5 for play, and it can't be like a fumble recovery. It has to be an important. Yeah. All right. Last thing from Wednesday night. So Rhule was fired up. He was fired up after the game in the locker room, and he had his daughters alongside him and made them cover their ears so he could say a couple things about whatever. He also reminded the team that there's all this noise out there. There's this narrative that's a bunch of insert your swear word here about how Nebraska can't win a close game. And he said, you guys just went out there and won a close game. And it's not going to look like a close game because it was 28-10. It was 28-3 at one point, but it was a close game when Nebraska started the 4th quarter, which it was a 1-score game. It was 10-3, or 7-3, 14-3, whatever. It was close at some point in the second half. Nebraska didn't net kick a field goal. Anyway, yeah, that's a nice little window. He was they're leaning into that. Rhule's 1-6, by the way, in 1-score games. His predecessor, Scott Frost, was 5-22. Mickey Joseph went 2-2 in 1-score games. So like, it's real. Like, Nebraska struggles to win close games and has for quite some time. Mike Riley was 7-10 in 1-score games at Nebraska. So anyway,
guy's a motivator.
We'll keep talking about that.
He knows which buttons to press that should serve them well whenever, in this season or next.
Absolutely, it should. All right, Friday we'll be back. Mailbag. Send us your questions. Put them on the YouTube channel here. If you're listening on any of the podcast listening platforms, thank you. Please subscribe. Give us a good review. whatever you want to do there. And you can email us a question at lockedonneb@gmail.com, or you can send them to us on Twitter at Mitch Sherman, at Connor Happer. That's where you find us. Thanks for listening today, making Locked On Nebraska your first listen. Now go check out the Locked On College Football podcast. Spencer McLaughlin has got you covered with everything you need to know throughout week 6 of an exciting college football season. You can find the link to the Locked On College Football podcast in the description of this show, so you don't need to search. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.